principal's report's next, and then after principal's report, I'll bring up the auditor to the board.
Parent-teacher conferences are this Thursday from 12 to 4 p.m. and 5:30 to 8 p.m. In the field house. We sent out another reminder today. During this time, parents can visit with as many teachers as they like, and they do not need to have an appointment. We are encouraging parents this year to bring a copy of their student's report card prior to arriving at our B. However, for those parents that forget or choose not to do this, we certainly will have self-serve kiosks for parents who'd like to avoid the line, or parents can wait in line to pick up a hard copy of their student's report card. We'll also have Bridget Wilmot, our instructional technology coach, available to answer any questions for parents regarding Schoology or Skyward. Additionally, current sophomore and junior parents also received an email about attending a dual credit information session during parent-teacher conferences, either at 3 p.m. or 6 p.m. in the Little Theater. It's a great opportunity to learn about all of the dual credit opportunities that are available through Triton. We also have some available through Loyola as well.
That's at 6 o'clock this Thursday?
Correct.
Okay.
3 o'clock or 6 o'clock in the Little Theater. It's hard to believe, but we are starting the course selection process already for next school year. So the process begins with current sophomores, and they meet with guidance counselors in a large group on October 30th and 31st in their science classes. And then following that, they meet individually with their guidance counselor to actually select their courses. And for sophomores, that happens November 5th through the 20th. Once we finish the sophomores, then we move on to the freshmen. So their process begins November 27th, and then juniors start when we return second semester. We always encourage all parents to look at their students' course selections and have a conversation with their students prior to that meeting, and review our online curriculum guide for specific courses. That will also have a lot of information about the dual credit opportunities. And the updated curriculum guide for next year becomes available on October 31st. There's a quick link on our website in one of on the left side under the blue section. There's a quick link for the curriculum guide. Veterans Day is celebrated here on November 9th from 8:30 to 10:30, and students will have an opportunity to honor our military veterans. The program begins with a continental breakfast for veterans, followed by a school-wide assembly, and ends with a personal question and answer session in students' classrooms, where veterans push in and share their experience, and students have the opportunity to ask them questions. If any veteran is watching and they're interested in attending, they can contact Mary Ann Nardi. The fall play is also rapidly approaching. The fall play is Alice in Wonderland, and the major roles are double cast, and so we're excited that we'll have 4 different opportunities for people to come and support the fall play, and that is November 8th through the 10th at 7:30, and then on that Sunday, November 11th at 2 p.m. And tickets can be bought in advance at the business office or can be purchased at the door. This month is also National Bullying Prevention Month, and so next week we're hosting an acceptance week with a variety of different activities each day, primarily in the cafeteria or as students enter the building to reach as many students as possible. One of those events that we are excited about trying is encouraging students to participate in a social media blackout day while they are at school, so we will see how well that goes. But we're trying to encourage students to disconnect and then connect with students maybe that they don't typically connect with throughout the day.
What day is that?
The actual social media blackout day, we'll be advertising it earlier in the week, but I think we're promoting it for that Friday. I also have 2 reports under the principal's report. The first is on page 7 of the board book. This is a brief report. It's just an update from ACT. It's our college readiness report on the class of 2018. So we talked about that this would be coming up soon when Kylie Lindquist reported out on our district goals. But the average ACT for this class was a 22.1, and it went up to a 22.4. So several students at some point took the ACT again and were able to improve the overall composite average. The second document is that I want to share with you tonight is on page 9. and it's an update on the new school report card. The 2018 school report card will officially be released on October 31st, and once it is released, we will post it on our website. But in preparation of that, I wanted to share some information and go over some of the new data points that will be included on the school report card. Probably the biggest and most significant change is the inclusion of a summative designation for each school based upon several indicators. So on page 9, you see a pie chart of several different indicators. So the exciting part about this is that with No Child Left Behind in our old accountability system, it only relied on performance on the PSAE, which was primarily the ACT. ESSA, the new accountability system, Every Student Succeeds Act, really takes into account a lot of other factors. So that's exciting at face value, but when you get down to some of the specifics, the state has yet to kind of work some of those out. And so I just want to give a brief overview of some of them. So if you look at the two grayed out areas on the pie chart, climate survey and college and career readiness survey, currently all schools in the state of Illinois are getting full credit for those because the state has yet to figure out how they're actually going to collect data. And all of these indicators at the particular percentage are what impacts our final category or designation that the school receives. So currently we receive full credit for those indicators, as do all schools. The next two indicators are math proficiency at 10% and English language arts at 10%. So that is pulling from our performance on the SAT. What is important to know about both of these is that these are based off of the state benchmarks. They're not based off of College Board college readiness benchmarks. And so under English language arts, the college readiness benchmark from College Board, who designed the SAT, had a benchmark of 480, but Illinois set that bar a little higher at 540. So we report out on College Board's benchmark, so you will see a dip in that eventually from what we initially reported out on. Same thing with math. College Board's benchmark is 530, and the state's benchmark is 540. And then just something to keep in mind, next year those percentages will change because the state will include the Illinois Science Assessment, and that's a test taken in March in all biology classes. That is a relatively new test. Students take that test in March, and we just received the scores last week. And so there's a bit of a delay with that, and it certainly is a new test that we are continuing to learn more about. The next indicator is English language learners' progress to proficiency. So the state is now tracking our students that are in our EL program with the intent that within 5 years of being identified as being an English language learner, that they should reach a proficiency level.
Is that what we used to refer to as English as a second language?
Correct.
So it's
Yes.
people, English is not their native language.
Correct, yes. And then the next one you can see the biggest portion of the chart is the graduation rate. That is comprised of three things. The 4-year graduation rate is 30%, the 5-year graduation rate is 15%, and then the 6-year graduation rate is 5%. Two other indicators, 9th grade on track. So that is the percent of 9th grade students that have earned 5 year-long credits and have not failed more than a semester of a core course, so biology, English, math, etc. And that is not a new indicator. That has been within the last couple of years. And then the last indicator, which is new, is chronic absenteeism. So this is the percent of students that miss 10% or more of the school year, and that includes excused absences or unexcused absences. So that's a big shift from what was reported out on the past, which was just chronic truants, which only looked at excused absences. This looks at, only looks at unexcused absences. This looks at both.
Is that a problem for us then?
I think
Because we only focus on unexcused absences, don't
well,
we?
we always look at students that miss 5%. Internally, we have always been looking at that data and identifying students that have missed more than 5% of the school year, more than 10% of the school year, and trying to provide interventions to them. It's just something new that's on the school report card. And then on page 10, what you'll see is all of that is used to identify which category a school falls into. And so to keep the language, this is the state language, but basically an exemplary school is a school that is in the top 10% and has a graduation rate of higher than 67%. And the most important part is that they have no underperforming subgroups. If they have an underperforming subgroup, they immediately fall to underperforming. The next category is a commendable school, and that's a school that doesn't fall into the 10%, top 10%, does still have a graduation rate of 67% or higher, and again has no underperforming subgroups. Again, if there's one underperforming subgroup, that school would also fall into underperforming.
So if you had 7 subgroups plus the total, and you've got 6 subgroups performing in the total, but you're 1 underperforming, you're automatically dropped down.
Correct.
Yes, that's correct.
Correct. No
So
matter
you're-
how well you do with anything
You're
else.
going to see tons of schools that were once commendable or exemplary become a lesser designation via this tool.
Yes. And that might not happen right away either, but that will, we do envision that will certainly happen over time.
And how do you determine if a subgroup is underperforming? Does it say
So
that
that's
somewhere?
pretty complicated, but
That's pretty
basically,
important, though.
basically the lowest performing group is the bottom 5% of schools. And every school gets assigned a score. It's not public. It's not publicized, but every school gets assigned a score that's used to determine the top 10%, the bottom 5%. So all of your subgroups have to have a score that's above that lowest 5%.
Also, it's not as bad as it seems.
So, well, it's not necessarily as bad as it seems, but the
There's
tricky
800
part
high
is,
schools in Chicago, in the state. You only have, right?
well,
So you
but
only have to be above 40 of them.
well, whatever
the
that, whatever
subgroup.
the score is, not above the actual, whatever their index score is based off of all that whole pie chart that we discussed on the front
Right.
page. So the challenging part in this is that this is a moving target, right? We don't know what the cutoff is for the top 10%, and whatever the cutoff is for this year could be totally different than next year and the year after that. The same thing with the bottom 5%. So it's really, you know, even if you do a great job and really improve or make significant gains, or you're just doing really well, it's all relative to all of the schools in the state of Illinois, and that can shift significantly.
What do they mean by the lowest 5% of the Title I schools?
So pretty much at this point, every school in the state of Illinois is considered a Title I school, with the exception of about 5 schools. I don't know what those schools are, but
What does it mean? They don't get Title I funds? The
Correct.
ones that aren't- Anybody gets
Correct.
Title I funds is a Title I
Correct.
school? Okay.
So I know this is a lot, but this is our new accountability system, and we'll learn a little bit of how that gets implemented and how that impacts us once we get our school report card.
Okay, I have some questions on this, if you don't mind. So there was a nice article in the Trib, and they talked about the school report card. And whoever is in charge of the assessment for the State Board of Education, his quote was, "They want a system that measures the impact of a school on student learning no matter where a student starts." So in other words, they're really emphasizing growth. And his quote here says something to the effect, "Student growth counts for 1/2 of a school's rating at the elementary and middle school level." So how is the growth thing going to be put in for high schools?
It is not at this point.
So it's in progress? Or-
To my knowledge, it is not necessarily in progress. They haven't mentioned it at all at the high school level. Because this is the first year that states or Illinois is required to give the PSAT 8-9 to freshmen and the PSAT 10 to sophomores. So until they have several years of data for that, it would be hard for them to determine growth. Whereas at the elementary level, they've always been assessing kids throughout several grades, and they have access to that data to assess growth.
So potentially, we could be on top of this, because I remember last time Kylie was here, I mentioned about tracking our, like, percentiles. And the way the state's doing it is basically by groups, basically white, black, Hispanic, Asian, low income, English learners, that type of thing.
Yeah, those are the subgroups.
So, looking at the big picture and the boards, sort of, we have this ACT goal, and a lot of that depends on who we have coming in. I personally think switching to this growth model is the reasonable thing to do. And it's something maybe as a board we'll talk about this more. But I think this is an opportunity, especially if we're gathering all this data, to get on top of this and be a trendsetter. Just something to think about.
Absolutely.
So this system is going to be used beginning with the current school year?
Yes, yes.
So
So
that-
at the end of October, all of this information will be on our school report card, and we will have a designation into one of those categories.
And are they taking, like, if you look at the graduation rate, it says 4-year graduation rate 30%. So if our graduation rate in 4 years is 95%, are they taking 30% of 95% and giving us a score, or what does that even
Yes,
mean?
each indicator has its own unique formula, but graduation rate is probably the most simplistic, and so yes, that is the process that they use for graduation.
So if you really consider, instead of the 50% of graduation, they really
Correct.
subdivided it. So there's 10 measures, and the fifth highest one, or fifth highest weighted one is chronic absenteeism.
Mhm.
And then we also have one that you get, it's free, a freebie this year, but it won't be, is apparently all we gotta do is get kids to fill out a survey.
Correct, yes. So for the
there's two of them that we have, we can't talk about, that come in high, did they grow, was there a full, did the moon come up or not? This is get kids to take a survey.
Yes.
And get kids to show up for school,
Uh-huh.
including excused. So we have to impress upon the parents and the students that it's important that they come, whether it's excused or unexcused,
Yes,
right?
absolutely. And we're already doing a lot of new things in regards to getting, sending that message out this year with our new school psychologist and Dave Mannon as well.
And besides having this weighting, which of course the most bothersome is you can become underperforming on this lowest 5, but might not be as bad. Does it affect how we get funds or anything, Kevin?
At this point in time, no.
Okay, except we're gonna have to get some, love to
If
see
you,
what kind of
once you
state
become a
support's gonna give
underperforming or
us.
lower performing, you have to submit plans on how you're addressing those subgroups.
And then there should be funding, some
For
funding that is
underperforming.
tied to that, yes.
Right.
And because we did, in the last report card, didn't we have one group that was, the equivalent to underperforming?
I don't recall. Like I said, this will be very different because also the subgroups are smaller. You only have to have 20 students for it to be considered a
Really?
subgroup. Yes.
Before it was,
So,
50 or something, right?
I thought it was 40.
Yeah, I thought it was-
45, somewhere around there.
Wow.
So with this model, it's not a linear relationship from year to year, because every year it's a new relative relationship. So we could actually increase, and many of the things we're doing, our students could have an increased growth, we could have increased scores, and still drop down in a category.
Yes.
Because another school went up to the top percent or did something in one of those other measures. So these categories do not necessarily give us an indication if we're doing better or worse. We have to be careful about that.
Well, it does versus the group. It's like everything we do. The fact somebody scores higher in the ACT or SAT doesn't necessarily mean they're a better student, but that's how we grade people. So overall, this is done the same at every school, and if we're improving, we should do better, and if we're not, we won't.
But we could still improve and fall down in a
Yes,
category.
is it possible, but is it likely?
it could be.
I think the major concern with, that I have and a lot of schools have is with the subgroup.
Of course.
You could have a subgroup that underperforms in one area that affects their score, their overall score, which then impacts the whole school. So to Laura's point, you could be doing great as a school across the board, but maybe, you know, one of the subgroups
But you still
dip
only have to
down.
do better than 5%, the worst 5%.
That we could become
You can become
underperforming
underperforming pretty quick.
with 20 kids only. So if you had some people move in because they were relocated due to earthquake or something.
We could find all kinds of reasons to say there's problems, but the fact of the matter is, all we have to do is at least as good as 95% of the schools. We got to do better than the worst 5%. I don't think that's an unrealistic goal for the school.
That's lowest performing, that's not underperforming.
That's how you get to underperforming.
No, underperforming,
Then
you could be in the top,
re-explain it.
yes.
You
So-
have to have a group or the school where their number is doesn't exceed the lowest 5% of the overall grade of the worst 5% of the schools in the state, right?
Correct, but
Yeah.
even if you're even if like you're the top school in the entire state, and you have one subgroup, so you have a group of 20 students,
I get that, but the point is, we're comparing ourselves to the worst 5% of the schools in the state. I don't think that's something we should be able to feel like we can do.
We're not comparing ourselves to the
That's
worst five.
what am I saying wrong? You said that again, she keeps telling me I'm wrong. What am I saying wrong? In order to be dropped down, you have to have a lower score than the highest of the lowest 5%
Just
in
those-
every subgroup and the school, right?
No, just
No.
those 20 kids.
Just
That's a
one
subgroup,
subgroup.
right?
One subgroup.
So you can't be.
Hold on, don't correct me when I said, right, you said no and then you repeated what I said. Every subgroup and the school have to perform better than the top of the 5% of the lowest schools in the state, right?
correct.
That doesn't seem like a very unrealistic goal for this school, that we can't do better than 90, equal or better even for our subgroup than the 95% of the student. We only have to do better than the 5% of the worst schools.
So I
That
think,
doesn't scare me.
so I think where it scares me is that a subgroup is only 20 students.
I
So
understand
within
that.
that group of 20 students, if your subgroup is that small, it only takes a few students to significantly underperform
Mm-hmm. So
or
what
not
you're
attend
saying is,
school
your
to
your
really
theory
bring that
is,
down.
is your theory that every school in the top 95% overall could have a subgroup that's below that 5%, so everybody's underperforming?
I wouldn't say everybody, but I would say that's how it could play out. That is the concern among schools, that a significant number of schools would all of a sudden be underperforming because they have a very small subgroups. They don't have a subgroup that consists of 100 students, but maybe they have a subgroup that consists of 20, 21 students, and there's a few of those students that really struggled that year that could bring that down, yes.
Well,
And-
if that
and
happens,
like
the
I-
state's going to have to change it because they don't possibly have the resources to manage 800 schools that have subgroups that come below. It
Correct.
would make no sense, right?
Right, but sometimes that happens in Illinois, and so I think since none of us have seen how this has played out yet,
Okay.
there is that concern among schools that if you have a very small subgroup, that could significantly impact schools.
Okay.
But we'll know more once, we see this play out this year and following years to come.
Or I think Kristen is just preparing the board for worst-case scenario somewhere down the line. Should that happen, she wanted to make sure the board has a better understanding of the four categories, and I don't think we're at any potential of being the lowest performing or underperforming at this point.
Well, I think we can probably sort of take this into account, that it's, depending on other factors, we can make our own assessment. This whole thing, it sort of bothers me, this thing about race that they have here, these subgroups are based on race. I mean, to me, you could throw that all out the window and just put it in percentiles, and the schools tracked by the percentiles that you were given, and how do those percentiles grow? Then there's no excuse. Well, I have this percentage of this racial group or that. I mean, it really should be irrelevant if you're coming in, percentiles are percentile, and they're growing a certain percentage, that's what should count. So I don't know how you feel about that, but we as a board can, sort of do our own thing.
Mhm.
With, of course, your recommendation, because you guys understand this a lot more than we do.
Again, this is just one snapshot.
Right.
People put up, and so sometimes when people are looking to move into your community, they'll pull up the school report card to see, how are they financially, how are they as a graduation rate. So this is just one snapshot that the state's trying to become more transparent throughout the state, assessing and advertising how their schools are doing to the communities and to the taxpayers. Dr. Keene, you're absolutely correct in that when we revisit the district goals, it's something that we've discussed for a while now about shifting more. Instead of trying to get a 26 on the ACT, they're trying to achieve maximum growth from the time we get them as freshmen till the time they leave as seniors.
Yep.
So there's definitely some room, and this could serve as a point to start discussions.
And I think the good news is too, that the state has changed the model a little bit, because some schools that were considered high-performing weren't meeting the needs of their subgroups, and that was lost in the mix, right? And so those kids were absolutely being underserved, flying under the radar, and nobody cared because it wasn't being reported. And so in this aspect, there's some accountability for making sure every kid gets everything that they need, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's certainly an improvement from No Child Left Behind.
I did have one question. In the new ACT scores, there was a significant, well, I won't say significant, but there was a large bump in the state average. And when I looked at the end, it looked like a subset of the state was used to calculate that score. Why would that have happened?
So that is the first year that schools were not required to give the ACT.
So then there was a select group of students who chose to take that ACT.
Correct, which is
Okay.
why you see an increase in the state average, yes.
Okay.
If I might say, you should give yourself some credit, the school should, there's a lot of commended scholars this year, I think more than usual.
Right.
I think it'd be nice on this report card that they, have some statistic like that in terms of commended scholars as a percentage of, school enrollment. You want to provide a minimum education to everybody, I get that. So you sort of flag the schools that are the lowest performing in certain groups, but we should also celebrate, high performance. Because the people at the top, the commended scholars are going to have an outsized influence on our society. It just is the way it is. So I just want to commend you for, and the school and the support staff for the number of scholars that we had this year.
We had 6, and then from the board meeting in September, we also had one student that was a National Merit semifinalist, so we have 7 total
That's
that
great.
got to that level.
Kristen, I know that some schools are not only putting up this on their websites, but they're also adding their own narrative to it to tell their story, right? Because if you're not telling your story, who is and who's not telling it right? So are we going to add any additional data, like what Dr. Keene just said, some of those numbers to what's going to be reported by the state on our website?
So we already do that. We have all our goals up there. We show that we've been tracking attendance for 5 years, and we have our profile up there. And this will go on, the school report card will go on the same link as those pages, so people would be able to see there are other indicators that we're
Okay.
tracking.
Good.